Hey everyone, this is Tender Loving Cares,
And this is Pizza Wolf.
and you're listening to
HORNGRY for More. It's a podcast about Feedism by the community.
and for the community. This episode is called Origin Stories.
Hi, I'm Panda on PB, and I'm a neutral gainer.
Greetings and salutations. I'm Ninja Smurf, and I'm a feedie/stuffer.
Hello, I'm Daniel, Lose My Breath 4444 on Grammar and Tumblr.
And I'm Derek, Chaser Puff 83 on Tumblr and Chaser 83 on Grammar.
I'm Belly Admirer, and I'm a female feeder and fat admirer.
Hello, my name is Paddy, and I am a 280-pound BHM. I'm also a feedie.
I'm in Plumpen, and I'm a feeder become feedie.
And we are a gainer and encourager couple.
I've been asked to talk about the first Feedism encounter I remember.
My introduction to Feedism, whenever I look back on it, sounds like some cheesy weight gain fanfiction, which never fails to make me laugh.
My first encounter with Feederism was probably about 13 years ago.
And I knew nothing of gaining at all prior to dating Lose My Breath.
My first Feedism encounter I remember wasn't really a single encounter, it was more of a whole bunch of encounters that led up to that.
I've only known about feedism really for about 2 years.
There was always this, and to this day there's always this thing in the back of my head that's like, I wish I was fatter, I wish I was fatter, I wish I was fatter, I wish I was fatter.
I followed that rabbit hole down.
I wish I was fatter, I wish I was fatter.
I felt like the rabbit hole I fell down into did end up in Wonderland.
I wish I was fatter, I wish I was fatter.
It was like this light bulb moment.
I wish I was fatter, I wish I was fatter.
I know my heart was racing.
I wish I was fatter, I wish I was fatter.
Oh yeah, fat boy, go ahead, rub that belly.
I'm hungry. I'm so hungry. Yeah, 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 I'm hungry.
So, welcome back. This is the second episode of the podcast. We made it. I wanted to thank the audience, actually, for the overwhelmingly positive reactions we've gotten. It's been so great seeing you guys on the various sites within the community and on YouTube. TLC has done a fantastic job of putting this out in every imaginable forum there is. iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud still or no? Or not SoundCloud?
Yeah.
No, it's SoundCloud as well. And if you, I think we're coming to like a store near you. You can just buy digital copies. Down. Not true. Not yet.
We're gonna sell vinyl records and everything.
Yeah, we're bringing back vinyl. No, but we really enjoyed the response, and we specifically really enjoyed the responses we got to us kind of going over our own little origin stories in the origin story of our podcast. So we've got a special treat for you today with the episode.
Yeah, we're gonna go into the origin of kinks as to the theories what might cause a kink. Basically, why are we weirdos?
And my co-host is eminently qualified to talk about that. So, dear audience, I will try to be your attentive avatar and and hopefully learn something about why I'm such a dang weirdo. And as we learn more about the origin of kink in general, we also were able to get from the community several recordings of your own personal origin stories that represent kind of a broad array of kink participants. And, we thought it'd be a treat for both you and for us to hear them and include them on our podcast. So we'll do that in the latter half of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but before we get there, we're introducing a brand new feature of the podcast that I think we're going to call the Pallet Cleanser. Sometimes between courses you get a sorbet or something, and just to kind of transition between our segments, we wanted to talk about some of our top threes or some of our kind of favorite little bits, and just do that as a chance to kind of explain a little bit more about ourselves. And then also reach out to you. So today we're going to go over two different top threes. Mine's going to be first. We're talking about feedism within cartoons. It's been depicted numerous times. It's a heck of a lot easier to show someone getting fatter in animated form than in live action, so it tends to show off. It's almost always a comedic device, but, we take what we can get. And it's been done to death. I mean, when I was kind of cracking the books and trying to get into this, when I'm putting together my top three, over 100 instances in everything, in animated form, everything from, video games to comic books to mobile games to, the more traditional television film stuff too. But drawing sequences of characters increasing in weight, it's been with us forever. It's a trope. It's part of the greater literary canon. It's just a thing that happens. But some people have done it more, and some people have done it better than others. I understand that that's a subjective valuation, but then again, I am one of the podcast's co-hosts, so I get to say something. So without further ado, my top three feedism in cartoons. I'm going to give you just the cartoons themselves, not any one specific episode, because some handle them multiple times. The first is number three is Family Guy. Family Guy made it. Fox started out on Fox, revived on Adult Swim. It's tackled weight gain and loss in its characters just so many times. It would be I'd be remiss if I didn't include it on the list. The lead character, of course, is that classic kind of American sitcom trope of fat loudmouth husband and skinny, more competent wife. Now they kind of turn it on its head and make it different. But Peter Griffin, the family patriarch in Family Guy, he's done everything from eat a year's supply of dehydrated food, then drink a glass of water and swell up like a balloon, to end up working from home and need to be carried around on a forklift.
I have not seen that one.
Oh, there's a ton of them. He's lost weight, he's gained it back, and it's true of other characters. His wife Lois has done the same. She gained weight in response to his contention that men can't be fat, only fat women can be fat. And then this was one where they actually acknowledged the erotic potential of increased weight, where Peter actually, ends up saying to his wife in bed, "I want you bigger, I want you fatter," and that just kind of, watching it, you have to think to yourself, one of us. Someone in the animation department at Fox, might be a fellow traveler. Who knows?
Oh, conspiracy theory.
I know, the truth is out there. Illuminati confirmed. We've also had just a ton of kind of one-off sight gags in Family Guy where there'll be a fat character, a character that gets fat, just in keeping with the style of humor that the show has, where kind of cut away, throw away visual gags. I've seen it everyone from characters who are unnamed to supermodel Kate Upton to Meg, the family daughter, to it's all over the place. And you can almost count, even the dog got fat once. You can almost count on at least once a season. There's going to be something in Family Guy that will kind of tickle that fetus nerve that we all seem to have. So that brings Family Guy in as my number 3 fetus-centric cartoon of all time. Now, after that, I absolutely have to, mention the one that did it for me in the first place. And this is going back, but I'm a little bit older. And it was Rocko's Modern Life. Rocko's Modern Life. I don't know. Are you familiar with it, TLC?
No.
Okay, Rocko's Modern Life was a cartoon on Nickelodeon, the American kids channel Nickelodeon, ran in the early 90s, 93 to 96. It was just kind of bizarre, off the wall. It starred a talking wallaby, his fat friend Heifer, who was a cow, a bunch of dogs, and there was one scene, and it was the first one. It was 93 to 96. I must have been, somewhere between 8 and 11 when I saw this, and Rocco wished to become big, and so he does, and he both grows into a giant and also kind of rounds out and becomes a giant fat dude. And it was that was a moment in young Pizza Wolf's life that had a specific resonance with me. So just based on the strength of that one scene alone and the impact it's had for me, Rocko's Modern Life comes in at number 2. They've had several other instances, where characters got fat or inflated or blew up or whatever. But that one itself has to stick out for me. So that's why Rocko's Modern Life is number 2. It's a bizarre cartoon, and it just holds a special place. We don't get to pick what we like, Mm-hmm. And then number 1 is also, it's a classic in terms of both memorable scenes that involve weight gain and feedism, and just the sheer amount. It's something that you would, over 30 different instances of expansion. We're talking, 560 plus episodes now.
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
It's if it were, I think it's on season
20 plus, right?
20 plus, yeah. It started in 1989, and is responsible for, I think we're on 27 seasons now, and it's responsible for some of the most classic and memorable scenes within the genre. And of course, I'm talking about The Simpsons.
Yep.
Has to come in as the number 1 most fetus-centric cartoon show of all time, and that starts with an episode from season 7, the golden years of The Simpsons, called King Size Homer. King Size Homer was the first one. The plot centered. I mean, the plot itself wasn't particularly kind to fat people, but it centered on Homer finding out a disability loophole existed, that any employee who was over 300 pounds would be able to work from home. That seems like a kind of weird number, because you look at Homer Simpson and you think, that guy was only, I think, 239 pounds, because he had to gain 61 pounds to get on disability, I remember. And so it shows him eating tons of ice cream at a ice cream place named Phineas Q Butterfats, which I thought was hilarious. He's eating tons of ice cream. He's got his belly sticking out of his shirt, and he's going to a nutrition store and buying a can of massive weight gain powder.
Yep.
And then when he's trying to determine whether or not things are going to be good for his gaining quest, he's told to rub the food he's considering eating on a paper bag, and if it turns clear, he's good to go.
I remember that one, yeah.
Yeah, so he gets very, very close to 300, ends up having to eat a donut made out of Play-Doh or modeling clay that his daughter gives him to push him all the way there, and then realizes that his gut was resting on a towel rack the entire time.
Yep.
And he's actually 315. So
that was my favorite part.
That towel rack. And then he lives the life of a fat king. He's working in his backyard, sitting in a hammock, drinking lemonade. He ends up buying a boo-boo and walking around town. It's just a weird shop.
I hated that part about it.
Yeah, he shops at a store called The Vast Waistband. Yeah, but that was probably the number one show. Eventually, he loses the weight. Mr. Burns pays for liposuction. But that was probably the number one episode within the community, one that gets mentioned time and time and time again. Both Bart and Lisa have imagined themselves in the future when they were fatter. Both, many guest stars have shown up and been content to have themselves expanded in one way or another. The horror makeup artist, great now director Tom Savini, exploded once during his guest appearance. Homer has routinely imagined his sisters-in-law Patty and Selma fat, or even the cat got fat. Again, it's just it's the well you can just keep going back to again and again and again and again. And indeed, The Simpsons have done just that. So those three, Family Guy, Rocko's Modern Life, and The Simpsons are my top three fetus-centric cartoons of all time, and that is my palate cleanser.
Awesome, yeah. And to anyone listening, so let us know what your top 3 would be, or what your top 1 is specifically, because there, as you've said, there's so many out there. If you go on YouTube, you'll find people have buried them out from like decades ago and put them on YouTube, definitely for Kingster's enjoyment, in my opinion. And yeah, so let us know what yours is.
Yeah, well, I'll be happy to report that in the next episode. We'd love to hear back from you, and of course, let you know what the rest of the community is thinking too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so our main part of this episode is all about how do we develop a kink. And as you've said before, Pizza Wolf, I'm currently studying psychology. I'm currently doing my master's, so I definitely have some insight into explaining what the modern theories are. They're not given facts per se, but I think they give us a pretty close understanding about how it develops. And I'm going to try to make it as simple and as basic as necessary, because there's no need to overcomplicate anything. So the origin of how a kink develops is pretty shaky science, and like most sciences that is tied to human sexuality, it's really come a long way. Still hasn't completely managed to detach from some social stigma that surrounds sex in many cultures. But there's definitely been a difference, because if you look back more than a century ago, when the first research was actually done by psychologists, and by way back, I'm really talking the 1880s.
Wow.
Yeah, scientists interested in human sexual behavior started to first theorize how a kink gets developed back then, and the theories were pretty damn grim, to say the least. So there was a famous French psychologist, Alfred Binet, who was actually one of the very first scientists to write a psychological case study of what we would consider a kinkster. So by no means anything representative, it was just him looking at the biography of one patient he had who had a kink and make his theories up about it. So his theory, and unfortunately that of like many scientists for decades to come later on, was that a fetish, as they called it, or a deviation, was basically sexuality gone wrong. They believed that a kink is what happens when and I'm literally quoting, when a tainted or weak character got aroused by something he shouldn't get aroused by. Meaning that like a sane person and a mentally ill person would experience something random, like, I don't know, seeing feet, for example, and a sane person would not get aroused, but like a weak person with a weak character or a weak mind would get aroused by that. So it was literally a symptom of mental illness.
Oh, wow.
That's horrible, isn't it?
Oh, we've come a long way since the 1880s, thankfully.
Yes, I'm so thankful. So the modern theory is actually like a pretty interesting concept if you think about it. And I think you'll get a very quick idea as to why and like what the implications is that are very positive implications in my opinion. And it explains both people who grow up with the kink as well as people who get into it later on in life, because we know that happens a lot. It basically comes down to the fact that everything we experience in life is associated with certain emotions for us. And the more we experience similar things, the more that emotion and that memory gets reinforced. Like more specifically, the link in our brain that connects a memory with a specific emotion gets stronger. So, like the easiest way to explain it is Pavlov's dogs, and I think that might ring a bell for you.
Sure, yeah, ring a bell.
I'm sorry. Psychology puns are just as bad as lawyer puns.
Yeah, you were really sitting on that one, huh?
So, Pavlov was a Russian psychologist, and he set up this experiment where they would simply measure a dog's saliva and how much a dog would salivate. And that's not something that a dog can consciously control, it's a reflex. And as we know, dogs salivate more when they're eating, just as part of the process. So what they would do with his colleagues is they would set up a couple of dogs or a few dogs, and they would ring a bell and then feed them very short after that. And now ringing a bell is a completely foreign sound for a dog. It's not by any means something that will cause a dog to salivate, and it didn't in the experiments, at least at first. But they continued to ring a bell before every meal for a few days, for weeks, and what started happening after a few weeks was that suddenly the dogs would already start salivating when they heard the bell.
Oh, wow.
Because they had learned that the sound means I'm going to get food. So now everyone who has a pet knows how they can go berserk over hearing a fridge open or the treat bag being like crumpled up and making sounds, won't be surprised by that. But it's actually a really mind-blowing thing, because we're not talking about learned behavior as we think about it. It's not just a thought process, it's the body reacting physiologically to a completely artificial new sound by doing something that we couldn't control otherwise, even if we wanted to.
It just completely bypasses any sort of rational thought or processing. It's just, wow, okay.
Yeah, it's basically called a conditioned reflex. So the dog has, whether consciously or subconsciously, experienced the sound and the food, two things that don't usually have a connection. And once those two random things started happening together, they started to build a connection between those two things. A connection that grew stronger and stronger the more it happened. And the very same thing happens in humans, like the placebo effect, for example. It's a much more complex but still accurate example as to how expectations can change the way our body reacts to things. It's the most basic form of human learning, which is why childhood experiences are so crucial to the development of our personality, because let's consider the human mind is like a blank canvas when we get born. And memories and experiences that we make very early on have a much higher impact on us. Any information that we get later on is basically getting compared to how we already feel about those things. For example, if we've made bad experiences with being bitten by a dog very early on, every time we see a dog after that, our first reaction will be to fear that dog, for example, even though the second or third time we see a dog, they're completely harmless, because we reference that back to their early experiences, and we start building this connection between dog and the emotion of fear. But if you've mostly had good experiences with dogs, and suddenly, like in your mid-20s, you get bitten by one, you will compare it to all the good memories you've had with the dog, and you probably are going to dismiss it as an outlier, and you're still going to love dogs. Might be a little more careful or whatever, but it's still getting referenced back to all the connections you already had, and will have lesser impact than the first memories you made.
Does it seem like phobias also have their root in those early experiences?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's some theory about some phobias having some biological thing, but most of them are learned, conditioned reactions to something. And that again is something where you can see even the conditioned reflex. We start sweating or our pulse raises, for example. That's just the same as with Pavlov's dogs, just compared to fear instead of hunger or food. It's basically like a very slow snowball effect. Like a little experience very early on can become bigger and have more and more impact later on. And that relates to kink because there's one very specific emotion or feeling that is often linked to arousal, and that's intrigue. It's kind of a mixture of surprise, curiosity, but mixed with some positive connotations, of course. Many people talk about taboo, and taboo is not exactly the same thing because it's a social construct, but we react to a lot of things that are taboo in our culture with intrigue. So there is a reason that a lot of arousal things are linked to taboo. So fetus memories that will arouse intrigue might be as simple as, for example, experiencing really great food, or the feeling of being really full for the first time, even just seeing fat people. But if that memory hits at the right time and intrigues us very early on, for example, maybe because we're not used to seeing fat people around us, or if you're particularly full and surprised at the feeling that creates, or you overhear people mention something about food or there's someone who's fat, and you don't understand that and you start obsessing over it for a while, that memory can start to get reinforced over time. And we also have this effect just in humans that we tend to seek out things that intrigue us, so we start to pay more attention to other similar memories later on. Now, what happens then?
Very intriguing.
Haha.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
Come on, you can't be the only one who gets a pun.
No, we all get puns. So, what happens later on in puberty, and even a bit earlier than that, is we'll start to get aroused at things we find intriguing. But since that feeling of intrigue has built all those association and links to memories and events, it's like a box full of random things to some extent. But because of human learning, and they're not just random single memories, but they're like clusters of things that have intrigued us, that interest us. Now, almost certainly there will be at least like some, what we could consider like vanilla triggers in there, because kids pick up incredibly early that there's something intriguing about things like nudity or sex. And of course, there's some biological things that play into that as well. But if through reinforcement, 80% of that box is filled with things that revolve around food and growth and weight gain, chances are that those things will arouse you later on a lot, and most children, they won't even understand why. They'll just notice they'll get aroused. And what happens after that is kind of old school stuff we already know. Like the more you masturbate about certain thoughts and experiences, the easier it is for you to get aroused by them again. And you keep basically reinforcing that, and the snowball keeps rolling.
Well, that makes sense.
That sounds, because we're talking so much about childhood, like that doesn't relate to people who experience or like start learning about their kink later in life, but it's totally possible to get that snowball rolling later in life, so to speak. Sometimes it takes like a bigger jolt to jumpstart the connection between, let's say, like feeding someone and arousal, just because you haven't had the same amount of time to reinforce that train of thought. But there are so many possibilities to still have it happen, or to make it happen even. For example, let's reimagine that box of intriguing stuff. While the box of someone who discovers the kink later in life might have been filled mostly with other stuff, either other kinks or stereotypically normal triggers of arousal, there might still be some feelings and some associations hidden in there that just haven't been reinforced up until then, and that you might consider dormant, for example. So once you discover it, however, they might realize that it does turn them on, and they can get to it very, very quickly, because the connection was always there. It just happened to like focus on other things for a while, and then you have these moments. And I think it was very interesting to listen to some of the audio bits that we got, that there were instances where someone would just suddenly put into the situation of discovering something fetus related, and suddenly they notice, wow, that does turn me on really, really bad. And that works perfectly. It might even trigger like older memories from when the connection was made. Like even if you've never been into Feedism during puberty, and you later on suddenly start being interested in it, you might still remember like some of those moments in the cartoons, or memories of seeing fat people, for example, because their memory is most always there. Another common thing is that maybe something new fetus related someone discovers fits in very well with the things that already turned them on. For example, a sub who's into like getting verbally teased or shamed during sex might discover like fetus teasing. They might start getting into that. And once there's like a link to arousal, that they might discover that other things are associated to that. For example, getting teased for overeating. And then suddenly there's a connection between overeating and arousal. And after that, weight gain. Like, who knows? The possibilities are almost endless.
Well, that's one of the things about the kink that we touched on last time, just how expansive it is. Expansive. How, just the amount of potential for exploration within Feedism is just nearly limitless. So take heart, listeners, if you stumbled across the podcast and Feedism is new to you, or you're not sure it's for you, there's plenty of time left for you to become a total freak show like us.
That is basically the modern theory behind how a kink develops, and I think by now you have an idea what's the biggest positive about that theory. What do you think?
I have no idea, I'm sorry.
It makes no distinction whatsoever between kinks and normal sex. We learn to get aroused by regular triggers just the same way we learn kinks. Like in the case of the box, for example, it makes complete sense of how we always grew up in a certain culture and never in complete isolation, that we start adding some of those regular sex triggers of our culture into that box. But we learn that connection between, for example, nudity and arousal just the same way as we learn the connection between food and arousal. It's most obvious when you look even at isolated cultures. There are cultures and tribes where nudity has nothing whatsoever sexual about it. And there is some connection between sexual organs and arousal that comes down to very plain, like simple biological components, because like most species, we can procreate if we want to. So our bodies were built to have a higher amount of nerve endings in our genitals, and triggering those will just mechanically result in arousal. It just feels good. We see that, for example, in children who will start grinding or dry humping things before they even know what sex is. But we're not a species that was meant to only get aroused to create offspring, and having children has very, very little to do with sexual arousal. But it also explains why most of our kinks get integrated into things like masturbation or regular penetration sex, for example, because it's also a part of it, but a lot of it is just learned. Like the nudity stuff, triggers for like big boobs, for example, has way more to do with learning than with actual biology.
Sure, I think speaking broader, you can kind of look and see that in action with just the shifting general mainstream non-kinky beauty standard over the years. There's a bunch of people who kind of armchair psychologist it and say, large breasts indicate that someone can nourish a child, or a big beard indicates someone's more virile. Completely true, by the way. But no, really,
I sense a bias there.
Yeah, well, who knows? But this it seems like it's all learned. Really, none of this is as we are much less the instinctive animal that we may perceive ourselves to be, and instead we pick up a lot of this kind of as we go.
Yeah, I think also a lot of that is kind of just trying to find an explanation retroactively, which there doesn't need to be any to some extent. But yeah, you're totally right. We are so used to having the sexual norm being displayed in the media and in our culture that we sometimes forget how much of it is really just down to learning. And yeah, this theory is the biggest argument for the theory that kinks don't even exist. Because that snowball theory of reinforced emotional learning doesn't just apply to kinks, it applies to almost every part of human behavior. It is tied to what foods we will like when we grow up, what color schemes we prefer when we're older, how we choose to deal and cope with certain emotions like sadness or anxiety, even what kind of people we are drawn to. It even explains how our learning process is naturally the most flexible the younger we are and gets stiffer the older we get, unless we force ourselves to kind of step outside of our comfort zones. It even explains the idea of people who are interested in a multitude of kinks instead of just one, because the more things you basically pack into that box of intrigue very early on, the more likely you are to be open to all kinds of kinks later in life, just because you made more of those connections. And when I'm talking about connections, I'm not just talking about this completely abstract idea of how we think, but there are experiments where a group of newborn rats were placed in the white cage, basically, with very little exposure to toys or objects or colors, and then another group who was placed in cages full of toys, different textures, smells, and just a few weeks later, they could literally measure that the rats were exposed to different things, had built almost 40% more neural connections in their brains than the other group of rats. So we're literally talking about neural pathways that are being built in the brain when we experience a lot of things early on. And the older we get, the harder it is for the brain to create those neural pathways. It's why you should expose your dogs as early as possible to other dogs, children, noises, or cars, so that later on will be more likely to not reject those things, or why pregnant women choose to expose their unborn babies to music, because it helps building those neural pathways that weren't there before very early on.
So would it be completely irresponsible to say that, being open to kink exploration and kink participation may in fact be making us all smarter?
Well, it depends. It depends how you define being smart.
I'm sorry, I'm the human equivalent of a clickbait article hosting a podcast. No, I understand the reality of it is probably way less sexy in terms of conclusions you can draw from it. But I think that you raise a great point in that kink tends to understand kink, and I say that anecdotally, I feel I'm open to more novel things as a result of exposure to this, because I sometimes have to say to myself, there, but for the grace of God go I. Lord knows I'm into stuff that people consider weird, and that that's not just limited to sexual expression. It's trying new foods. It's seeing films that I wouldn't see otherwise. It just kind of broadens my experiential palette. And I'd like to think that I can credit at least some of that to my experience within the community.
Yeah, but I mean, the idea can also to some extent backfire, because if someone, for example, is too focused on just a kink, it goes the same way as someone who's only focused on vanilla. Someone can be just completely focused on one aspect of the kink and not wanting to open up to other things. And that's totally fine. That's totally fine. Like, what matters at the end is that you're the only person who has to deal with it to some extent. Everything else you can basically influence and make your own decisions about. And if you're happy having just vanilla sex, that is just as fine as someone who's completely happy having just their one kind of kink.
Amen. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the, as you mentioned, one of the best takeaways from from the evolution of this discussion since the 1880s is that we don't have to, front load the whole talk with judgment, privileging one type of sexual identity or expression over another. Doesn't matter when you found it. Doesn't matter when you came to it. Doesn't matter if it's for you or not. Regardless of that, we're all decent people. All our bodies are rad. All our ways of having sex and sexual pleasure are similarly rad. And although TLC and I are big fans of Feedism, I will remind the audience that we are also not the bosses of Feedism, and we have no, our opinions are just that.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe in like another century this theory will be complete and utter nonsense. But I do like it. I really do like it. Yeah, something in the water.
Yeah, that's what it was this whole time. Alien mind control. But no, I think that theory hangs together really well, and it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense when applied to kink more broadly too. So if you think you understand why you're into Feedism, but you might have something else that you're into but curious about, I think you could probably apply a lot of these same principles.
Definitely, yeah.
And is there any evidence that you can unlearn these things just as we learn them?
Basically, can you decondition a kink, huh?
Yeah. Can you decondition a kink, I guess?
Well, the answer is like basically not really. It's
Darn. There you go.
It's not as horrible as you might think. So, deconditioning has a really ugly history. People thought if someone has a connection between arousal and a certain thing, all they have to do is build a stronger connection between the same thing and something negative. And I think some listeners might already know where this is going. People have tried to decondition things like homosexuality the same way. For example, by giving people like nausea-inducing pills and then showing them homosexual porn, hoping that sooner or later they would like start to associate homosexual thoughts with nausea. And not just homosexuality, but they did try the same thing with alcoholism. And they showed it doesn't work. And there's an inherent flaw in that logic, and that is simply that we know that it's not a learned association. It's something biological that people are born with. But even in things that are learned behaviors that they want to modify in some way, they just showed that deconditioning doesn't really work like that. And the most common theory is that it's literally impossible to delete an existent link in your brain that has already been built. And that makes total sense if you consider what I mentioned about the rats, that it's not just a theoretical connection, but an actual neural connection. And what happens instead is that both those associations will exist alongside each other, constantly conflicting each other. And that's incredibly taxing on the human brain and on the psyche. It's why deconditioning as a so-called form of therapy is nothing short but mental torture.
Oh, wow.
That's just a fact. There's a reason why suicides are so high in people who are forced into those like sexual re-education programs, as they're called.
Sure. Yeah.
It's also even why punishment to correct behavior is never as efficient as other methods. Because, like, for example, a kid who has fun, like skipping class to go watch movies, will not just consider watching movies as less fun because they've been beaten because of it. They just stop doing that to prevent the beating or even find ways around it, but the connection is still there. Just on top of that connection, it will also build a whole set of new connections, and not just going to the movies with fear, but getting caught with fear, connection between their parents and fear, or between enjoyment and punishment. And I think you can see how that can cause a lot of turmoil in someone. And the only thing that seems to work to stop a certain behavior is you find an alternative behavior that is even more intriguing to them. Like, for example, reward a child when it actually goes to school and gets grades with something it wants even more than going to the movies. That's a lot more effective, especially long-term effective, than using punishment. You can choose to suppress the kink if you generally think that what you get out of suppressing it is more enjoyable than the kink itself. But if the only thing that you get out of it is external validation, it's never going to surpass the feeling of sexual arousal and orgasm that you will have with the kink. Especially because external validation loses its significance very quickly the older we get. And studies have shown that the huge impact orgasms have on our brain is akin to the reaction we have to certain drugs like heroin. So it's almost a losing battle. You'd have to find something that you get out of suppressing a kink that is way, way stronger than just external validation.
For the record, we do not recommend doing heroin to get
No, no, definitely not. But it also explains why we can lose interest in certain kinks if we find another kink that is more novel and more intriguing. We don't erase that initial connection and you might always return to it, but it also shows that, you can not get over a kink, but find something else. But the way is not just repressing it, which also oftentimes is the effect that you start thinking about it even more. Like the whole example, don't think about the polar bear, and you're going to think about a polar bear, you know?
Now, you mentioned that again, this all kind of runs on intrigue and the connections that are built as a result of that intrigue. What about the idea? Now, I know we've moved quite a long way from Feedism and kink in general being perceived as pathological. I might have to take that back, because some people certainly still do consider Feedism pathological. Yeah. But how would you respond to the idea that the beyond the details of the kink itself, the fact that fat is so taboo in society, the transgressive nature of the kink holds appeal separate from it, or are they tied together?
I think that really depends on the individual. I think a lot of it naturally ties together. I guess we said taboo is part of intrigue, so if that's especially taboo, then it's obviously going to have an impact. But I think it kind of leads me to think, would there be less feedists if fat was more acceptable in our community?
I think that's a really good question.
I wouldn't know how to answer that one, because I think that's a very, very hard question.
Yeah, I can certainly say that the community itself, as someone who is both a feedist and fat, the community itself, I can relate to the stories of relief I hear when someone joins the community, finds the community, in just kind of having a place where they can exist, without having to make excuses for their body or their size. And it's not, and I know we kind of go back and forth with some of the fat people out there who aren't into feedism, and are kind of interested in using some of the web communities that feedists tend to frequent, for
as an outlet.
Just kind of an outlet, because it's one of the few places that you can just be unapologetically fat, and that is just such a huge relief. I'll tell you, just from my personal experience, my weights fluctuated a little bit as an adult. I had a couple periods where I did try and go on a diet and lose some weight, and I think I lost about 40 pounds once in the course of a summer. And I mean, I was just done. It was ridiculous. I was eating like the same 3 meals every day, and I was working out, and I mean that wasn't a bad part. But every day I was getting comments from people. Oh my goodness, the incredible shrinking man, you're losing, and eventually that proved to be unsustainable, and I gave it up, and realized that, oh man, I it's horse trading, and I prefer the alternative. And of course, in very short order, I gained that weight back and then some more, and it was crickets. No one ever said anything, and the taboo nature of fat kind of always made me second guess. Not that I necessarily wanted strangers to say, "Hey, you've gained weight," but it just kind of made you second guess your existence as a fat person, just because no one would ever say anything. It would be the elephant in the room that no one talked about. So. Maybe if kink helps to at least provide an outlet for some of those just still really negative societal impact or impressions about fat in general, not even just fat kink, but fat in general, I think that's just kind of an ancillary benefit. It does really well for the community.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know, it's kind of a sad thing, and it doesn't just go back to the kink, it goes back to just being fat in general, being interested in something that other people aren't interested in. That just, I don't know, I keep saying this one thing because it really has helped me a lot. It's just always ask yourself, would you rather be normal or would you rather be happy? And that should be an easy choice. That should be an easy choice.
Sure, and it should be an easy choice. But I think for some people, the costs associated with not being normal were so high that they might have made that choice, and they decided, if they had a really restrictive parent, or if they had or maybe they worked in an industry where conforming to a certain body image was really, really important. And I think that's kind of a great sad story of our time that really kind of goes untold. How many more people might be interested in this or open to kind of exploring a whole new thing that they could get into and derive some sort of fantastic enjoyment and fulfillment from in life, but they won't because we beat them down. That's not to say that kinksters are necessarily super duper brave. It wasn't. I didn't have a choice in the matter. It kind of came naturally to me.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, it's certainly a sad story that not everyone feels able to make that choice between normalcy and happiness, and hopefully we'll be able to, through the good work of this podcast, but through the work of publicizing, just how normal this stuff is. Again, we touch on it every time we talk of how out there the perceptions of us in the media are.
Yeah.
Everything from not only just media, but also a lot of the academic stuff. There's starting to be kind of more academic in the field of fat studies, and a couple of Feedism papers coming out that still kind of get it wrong about us.
Yeah, and we also shouldn't forget that we always see it so isolated. If we compare just the people who are into feedist and compare them to everyone else, we feel like the minority. But if you add together all the people who have a kink, once you start adding up the feedist with the foot fetishist, with the dominatrixes of this world, with the leather kinksters, with the furries, and with everything else that exists out there, you suddenly start realizing that being normal is actually the minority. Because more people are interested in unusual sexual interests than those who aren't. And I think that's an awesome thing, for example, also about the internet. The information is more and more out there, and we get exposed to it earlier on. And just seeing that there are other people into all kinds of different things will make you feel better about things that you don't consider normal, because you start realizing that there are other people out there, and what we see on TV, what we read in the newspaper is in no way representative.
All in all, I think the origins of the kink are fascinatingly tied in with the origins of kink itself and the origin and kind of the theories behind human development, and it's not quite so strange as we think we are. I suppose we're not quite so strange as we think we are. We're not miswired. There's nothing wrong or different. We developed along a very normal and very human path, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
But some people's conduct is less than human. I believe you have a top 8 about that very topic. Or pardon me, a top 3.
Yeah, nice segue. Yeah. Let's get to my top 3. My top 3 is it's going out to all the ladies and gentlemen out there who get unsolicited dick pics. Because if there's one thing we know about being around, to be honest, not even feedist communities, if you're on the internet, almost basically, you're gonna get dick pictures you don't want. And I'm not saying everyone hates getting dick pictures, but it's not up to the penis owners to decide who wants one and who doesn't. So, just as a reminder, always ask for permission.
I can't believe we still have to say that.
I know. I know, don't get me started.
All right.
I thought about my 3 favorite ways to react to unwanted dick pics in your inbox.
Okay, this should be good. Take notes, ladies and gents.
Number 3. When you received a surprise dick, it's time to dive into your meme library. Nothing says never send me an unwanted dick pic again like a gif of Louis C.K. laughing hysterically at his wiener, or a picture of Tricky Dick Nixon shaking his head in disappointment.
Going with the animated GIF.
Yeah, I love GIFs.
GIF, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah.
GIF, I don't know. The guy who invented it says GIF, but...
He's not listening. Okay, number 2. Sometimes it's hard to understand the logic behind harassing people online with pictures of their dick. But the guy probably thinks his dick is a pure thing of beauty and every single person needs to see it. So make sure to give him a dose of reality and just send him back a picture of a bigger and better looking dick.
Can't beat him, join him, I guess.
Yeah. Also, I'm not saying a bigger dick is necessarily better, but I guarantee you the guy sending around his dick picture is gonna think that way. So, number 1, and it's my favorite, even though it's very vicious and even makes me kind of cringe, but the next time he feels the need of basically peacocking his own cock around. Sorry, I can't stop with the puns today.
I'm gonna get sued by someone, I don't know.
Just send him back pictures of bananas or sausages getting sliced by sharp blades, and I hope that will stop it.
Yikes. I felt that one.
Yep, so did I, and I don't even have one. Yeah, so that's my top 3. I hope now you know in the future how to react to unwanted dick pics. And guys, if you never want any of those 3 things happen to you, just don't do it and ask first.
Don't do it. Fantastic. All right, so I think now, and those are some quality responses. Hopefully, they will do something to stem the tsunami of dicks which populate inboxes all around the internet every day. I don't think I'm ready to bet the house on it. But either way, hilarious responses. I think now we're going to have a chance to hear from some of you in the community while we take a nap. No. Everyone responded really great to the origin stories we had in our last podcast, but we wanted to hear from some of you because our experiences are just that. They're our own and limited, by the fact that there's only 2 of us. So when we were looking for origin stories from the community, we cast a really wide net. We've got people from 3 continents, right? A couple different countries, men and women, straight and gay. We are all over the place. Feeders, gainers, feedies, mutual gainers, and we wanted to share those stories with you.
I edited some of them together, so just give them a listen and enjoy.
Greetings and salutations. I'm Ninja Smurf and I'm a feedie/stuffer. My introduction to Feedism, whenever I look back on it, sounds like some cheesy weight gain fanfiction, which never fails to make me laugh. I was 18 years old, nearing the end of college, which is what we call high school here in New Zealand. And I didn't know it at first, but the person I was dating at the time turned out to be a feeder. When we first got together, he would take notice of all the things that I love to eat. Like, I love pizza, but also anybody that knows me knows that I have a massive thing for Oreos. He used to bring me heaps of Oreo stuff, along with all of the other foods that I was really fond of. Whenever he came to see me, he would turn up with food. Over time, the amount of food that he brought with him increased, and I never really talked to anybody about it, but overeating always made me feel a certain way that I could never quite understand. I grew up in a really strict environment with no Wi-Fi access at home at the time, so I didn't have much exposure, and I didn't really get what was happening at first, but I knew that whatever it was, I liked it. And it was this on top of how there was a certain way that he watched me when I ate, with a certain intensity and a certain admiration that I had never experienced before. Rather than shy away from my fat body, he reveled in it, always squeezing and touching my belly as if it was the most amazing thing in the world. I wasn't used to this, but I adored it. It left me feeling curious. I didn't know what Feedism was, and being that I was super awkward and the thought of talking to somebody about it at the time was unthinkable, what I ended up doing was taking my questions and curiosities to Yahoo Answers. I went to my school computer lab and I waited for there to be like no people in the computer lab. And then I sat down and I typed out something along the lines of, "I'm really confused. I'm pretty sure my boyfriend is trying to make me fat on purpose, question mark, question mark, question mark." The next day I checked to see if anybody had replied and I found one that said, "He's probably a feeder." And I had never heard of the term before, and so that's when I did a Google search on my phone, and I was sitting in class and I was reading about feedism, gaining and stuffing, and the more I read about it, it sort of planted that thought there, like, I'm totally into this. This is something I want to try. This is something I need to explore. This is something I need more of. I need to know. I just need to know. It was like this light bulb moment. I now had enough information for me to pinpoint essentially how I felt about certain things. I finally had an explanation and words to describe how food made me feel. and why overeating made me feel a certain way. But more than that, after doing more digging, I saw that there was an awesome online community of people from all around the world that totally understood and felt the same things. Actually seeing the words in front of me made me realize how I partook in it without actually realizing it. I found myself thinking back to all of the things that my partner did, and I couldn't help but think about my partner and I in situations that I was reading about. Thus began my feedy fantasies. The idea of him feeding me made my face flush and my heart race. I was excited and I needed to know more. It took me a few days before I could gather the courage to approach my then partner about it, and he admitted that yes, he was into the kink, and we had a long and honest conversation where I opened up to him about Yahoo Answers, which cracked him up by the way, and I told him about my curiosity and eagerness to explore this new world that I had just found out about. A few weeks later, that is when I had my first proper Feedism experience. The first thing that I was ever fed was the Oreo cheesecake, and I haven't looked back since. That feeder-feedy relationship is the most intimate thing I have ever experienced. That moment, my discovery of this fetish, changed a lot for me. I'm super grateful that somehow by fate, I found something that now not only plays such an important part in my life, but it also makes up a huge part of who I am. I will never be able to look at future relationship possibilities the same way. There isn't any turning back for me. As odd as it may sound to some people, Feedism in a way was what helped me to learn to love my body and the amazing things it is capable of wholeheartedly.
Hello, I'm Daniel, Lose My Breath 4444 on Grammar and Tumblr.
And I'm Derek, Chaser Pup 83 on Tumblr and Chaser 83 on Grammar.
And we are a gainer and encourager couple. So I'm the gainer, Lose My Breath, and
I'm the encourager, Chaser 83.
And we've been dating about 8 months.
9 almost.
My first gainer memory probably would be when I was a kid. I remember watching movies and TV shows and certain things like that, and characters in it would get really fat or they'd get really blown up big bellies or inflated or some sort of thing, and I remember just being really fascinated with it. Like I couldn't look away, and I remember watching like the intros to certain shows and really hoping that it was going to be that episode. I'm not sure what makes me feel that way, but I can specifically remember sitting there, just really excited to see that sort of a thing.
And I knew nothing of gaining at all prior to dating Lose My Breath. In fact, he broke it to me right when we started dating that he was into something different, and he didn't quite tell me what it was. So, of course, I thought, all kinds of crazy things until he explained what it was.
And I was very nervous to tell him about it because it's not exactly your run-of-the-mill fetish.
But, so he introduced me to Grammar, and I did some Googling and researched on my own. And, I'd always been into bears and bigger guys anyway, so it wasn't too far of a stretch. And, at first I was a little, confused or wasn't sure exactly what it meant, but, I definitely got into it. And I really do enjoy, the whole gaining encourager interaction.
Yeah, it was really exciting to let the cat out of the bag to him, and he'd rubbed my belly before, but after I told him it was completely different, and he started, making my plates a little bigger and patting me on the tummy here and there, and it's been really great being open with somebody about it and being in a good relationship.
And I definitely enjoyed feeding him that burger that first time. That was an exciting experience for me. And I definitely enjoy rubbing his belly and stuffing him till he's immobile almost because he's so full.
Making my belly grow.
Yeah, that's really fun.
Yeah, we met on Facebook, so I'm sure he was not expecting the gainer world out of me.
No, I really did not expect that sort of thing. Because, in real life, Lose My Breath is pretty fun and exciting, but you wouldn't expect he has this interesting other side to him, which is the gaining world.
So far, I've gained about 90 pounds since high school.
Shooting for that 100 mark.
Yeah, from 135 to 225, 230 almost. And, I don't know, I just really enjoy having a big gut, and I enjoy gaining weight. And I mean, aside from it being sexual, it just, I don't know, it makes me happy.
And I definitely enjoy cuddling with my big bear fatty boyfriend, and it's a lot of fun.
I like one of my favorite things is when I'm sitting on the couch and I'm rubbing my belly kind of absent-mindedly, and I look up and he's just standing there staring at me with a big smile on his face like, oh yeah, fat boy, go ahead, rub that belly.
And I've actually found myself that in different situations I'll start absent-mindedly rubbing his belly myself. Like we're in a new place or just hanging out, and I'll just reach over and start rubbing his belly without even thinking about it. I have to actually watch myself sometimes.
Yeah, and gaining used to just be in the back of my mind, and it was something that I would think about, late at night or whenever the show was on, or it was never really in the forefront of my mind, and I was always really afraid to share it with people, but I'm getting more and more comfortable with it, definitely, as I get older, and so it's really nothing to be afraid of. It's just, something that you enjoy, and you gotta be open about it with people.
And it's a lot of fun, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's exciting, and it's just fun. We have a lot of fun with it.
I mean, I'd say, Warren Davis artwork definitely blew the door wide open for me as far as gaining goes. And I remember seeing that for the first time and just being completely floored that something like that existed, because I thought I was the only person in the whole world that even thought about it. And meanwhile, there's a whole community out there, and apparently there's even people that aren't in the community that you can find that are, willing to go the extra mile as far as being a gainer and an encourager.
I mean, there's, of course, extremes to anything, but I think we have a really good interaction, and we have a good balance between, our gaining lifestyle and our actual lives, and they're kind of one, intermingled, and it works well for us.
So, I'm Lose My Breath 4444 on Grommer.
And I'm ChaserPup83 on Tumblr and Chaser83 on Grommer.
Don't be afraid to look us up, and keep your bellies full.
Bye.
Hello, my name is Paddy, and I am a 280-pound BHM. I'm also a feedie. I've only known about Feedism really for about 2 years. So unfortunately, in the last 2 years, I've only ever really had online chats with people, not had a proper fetus relationship yet, though I'm very hopeful. But I did have an experience a few years back. Had a bit of a fling with a very slim, who I would now recognise as an FA woman. And I'm glad that I found out afterwards that feedism is an actual thing and fat admiration is an actual thing. It was wonderful at the time, short-lived unfortunately, But yeah, it was great. We used to go out to restaurants, and I would finish off most of her desserts and some of her main meal, and she'd absolutely love that. So it was great to feel the acceptance of my appetite really for the first time ever, and not have to be embarrassed about that. Was very, very liberating. You know, she'd do things like when we cuddle, she would give me tummy rubs, and that was obviously very nice. I felt it was very unusual at the start, because obviously I'd spent a lot of time in the company of people who are normal in society, in the way that they look badly towards large bodied individuals. So it was nice, but also very awkward at the start to experience that. It was great. I wish I had have known that about Feedism at the time, and we maybe could have explored it a bit more together. But I'm hopeful that in the future I'll find someone who is on the same wavelength again. I do tend to find that I'm more attracted to contrasting body shapes. So although I am totally body positive, and I can also be attracted to larger people, but mostly I find contrast really floats my boat and ticks my boxes. That's about it, really. Thank you for listening.
I'm Belly Admirer, and I'm a female feeder and fat admirer. I've been asked to talk about the first Feedism encounter I remember, but I'm honestly not sure I could go on about it for a whole 5 minutes. There's also the problem of defining an encounter. When did I first become aware of my Feedism-related thoughts? Just an encounter in general? Or an encounter with another feedist? Therefore, I am going to take a bit of time to briefly describe some of my feedist background first, before delving into an encounter that was a major turning point for me. Like many of us, I had a fascination dating back to early childhood. If you are familiar with the movie Charlotte's Web, you may remember the scene where Templeton the rat gorges himself at the fair and is so stuffed he can barely crawl the next day. I would request to watch that movie over and over again, in large part because of that scene. I was mesmerized. I also tried to get people to play a game with me in which they were supposed to pretend I had convinced them to eat 1,000 sausages. But no one was ever too keen on that game. For the record, if you eat about 2.75 sausages per day, you can do it in a year. As I entered my teens, I began searching out feedist material online, mainly in the form of weight gain fiction. I was amazed there seemed to be a lot of people out there who had the same fascinations and fantasies as I did. However, I never did much other than reading stories. This was partly because I felt like there wasn't a lot of material out there that catered to me, and partly because I still had a lot of doubts and shame about it all and was trying to push those thoughts away. I was also still young and didn't want to talk to gross adult men about it. So what finally prompted me to join the community? Specifically Fantasy Feeder, which was my entry point. Well, I had an encounter with a non-feedist and got to witness for the first time someone really overdoing it with eating in public. I was on vacation in Florida with a man I had met a few months before. We took a day trip to Key West and ate out that evening on the way back. He chose a Mexican restaurant, and it turned out that the portions were huge. He easily polished off his entire plate in short order, which I found pretty impressive. The waitress evidently did as well, since she made a remark about how he must have been very hungry. Meanwhile, I was working through my meal much more slowly and through threw in the towel about 1/3 of the way through because I was full. At that point, I asked my companion if he wanted any of my food. I wasn't expecting him to say yes, but to my surprise, he did. He pulled my plate over to his side of the table and began to eat the rest of it. He was eating more slowly than with his portion, but he actually finished the entire remainder of my meal. Until that moment, I wasn't even aware that I found someone else finishing a meal I can't finish to be hot. Again, and I know this sounds like something straight out of a weight gain story, the waitress commented. She said something like, "Wow, you have a really big appetite." I was secretly dying on the inside because I had never seen anyone eat that much in one sitting before. I was still processing how I felt about him finishing off my food, and I found it incredibly sexy that the waitress had commented as well. They were probably pretty casual comments from her point of view, but in my mind it just added perfectly to everything I was feeling. This isn't where the story ends either. This guy is pretty bad at distance driving and tends to get sleepy behind the wheel. Because my name wasn't on the rental agreement for the car, I couldn't take over driving, so I spent quite a bit of time that trip feeling anxious about his driving and watching him to make sure he wouldn't doze off. That night, since it was late and he'd just had a giant meal, it was obviously worse than usual. He concluded it was because his blood sugar was low. Personally, I thought it had more to do with him finding driving boring, being tired, and his belly being too full, but I wasn't about to argue when he asked me to feed him fruit and bread to keep him awake. Which I imagine worked to some extent, only because it kept him busy. I remember being glad it was dark because I wasn't sure what kind of look I had on my face, or how much I might be blushing. I know my heart was racing. I was wondering how tight his pants were, how full he felt, if he would mind if I touched his belly. But I didn't find the courage to ask any of those things. Once we got back to where we were staying, we went straight to bed, but I didn't actually get a lot of sleep that night because my mind was racing as well. I felt so overwhelmed by the experience, and all those thoughts I had been spending so much energy pushing away came flooding back with full force. Once those floodgates were open, there was no closing them again. Over the next 5 months, I thought of that night often, and I began visiting online chat rooms again, something I had quit cold turkey some 6 years before. I was trying to find people who would be willing to anonymously talk to me about it. It wasn't very satisfying though, and I reached the point of realizing I was burning up inside and simply had to talk to other people who understood. Or I might just explode from frustration and curiosity and confusion. I bit the bullet and signed up for a fantasy feeder account. I haven't left the community since.
Hi, I'm Panda on VB, and I'm a mutual gainer. My first encounter with Feedism was probably about 13 years ago. I had pretended to be sick one day at school, so I was sent home. And I was learning to draw at the time, and I was looking up drawing references, and I stumbled upon some character from Pokemon, and to my surprise, she was drawn fat, and I hadn't seen anything like that before. So I followed that rabbit hole down, see who drew it, where it come from, and I stumbled upon a site called animeexpansion.com. Not sure if it's still around. And there was just this whole archive of that kind of thing. I was fascinated. I was like, what is this? Why have, I'm so used to people drawing things stick thin and seeing this, it was like, what is this magical stuff? saw all these things that I'd never seen before, just all these girls who were fat for once instead of thin. On there I found someone talking about fantasy feeder, as most of us know about, as it's the cesspool of the Feedism world. And there I found the real life versions of what people were drawing, and I just felt this kind of thing off my head, like I'd discovered something that was an essential part of me before I knew what it was. I felt like the rabbit hole I fell down did end up in Wonderland. Of course, you did have your Mad Hatters about with the lucky FAs, but them aside. Yeah, I saw these girls, they looked like what I wanted to be, and from there I just couldn't help but think, I want to be that, and I want to be with that. And through there I discovered what it was. Back then everyone called it Feedism, but I think Feedism is a better name for it. I found out the terms and everything, what everything was, and it really opened my eyes to what I really wanted with my life and what I wanted with relationships. And it filled this massive void where I didn't know what I wanted when it came to relationships and myself and my own body image, as I'd struggled with an eating disorder. I still did at the time, and this was really a gateway to helping me recover from that. But from there, that's pretty much where I kind of laid the foundation of all my relationships from then until now, and I probably will into the future. When I discovered kind of feeders, feedies, and mutual gainers, which is what I am. It was exciting and it was surprising. But in the end, I think it really filled a void and really made up a part of my life that I wouldn't really want to replace. And it's a flower that I'll keep well watered. It's a big part of my life and I'm never really going to give up.
I'm in Plumpin, and I'm a feeder become feedie, also mutual gainer, but I'm not so much a feedie anymore. My first Feedism encounter, I remember, wasn't really a single encounter. It was more of a whole bunch of encounters that led up to that idea. I guess, first off, I started looking at BBW porn. I remember loading up fatchicks.com or something as a joke with friends, or I think maybe just my brother. And I ended up going back to it and thinking, they're actually really hot. And then from there I started looking at other fat porn, and eventually the more I looked at, the larger models I started looking at. And I think that's when I started fantasizing from that moment that I liked the idea of a slim person getting bigger. And it wasn't until I visited the Dimensions magazine weight room and I read stories about, kind of extreme instant weight gain stories that it really solidified the fact that I was really into it. And I think that was pretty much it for me as far as being a feeder goes. Like, it didn't really stray much from that, but when I started becoming a feedee was where I feel like I really had my revolution in Feedism. And that was where I remember being on a holiday with my ex-girlfriend interstate, and I just couldn't shake this fantasy I kept having of, at the time I was in university, so it was this idea of moving into a rental property, like a share house, and the person that lived there was an SSBBW feedee who, by hanging around her, I would slowly become a glutton myself and then give in to the desire to get fatter. And that was a fantasy that just kept coming back. I remember just really, getting into it while I was on that holiday. And it wasn't until when I got back that I started really, exploring that in my bedroom and thinking about it constantly until I just found myself that I had stopped thinking about women getting fatter and more so about myself getting fatter. And that's where I started to the switch had been made. I was no longer a feeder, I was then a feedee, and that was when I started to, look into resources about getting fatter, about what foods I should be eating. And it really excited me. There was always this, and to this day, there's always this thing in the back of my head that's like, I wish I was fatter, I wish I was fatter. And thinking about, I need to be fatter right now. And that's pretty much how my, progression came to me at this point. And so, looking back to it, I have a lot to thank for my sexuality to web models and to other female feedees, because if it wasn't for those people that I was fantasizing about getting off on, on paid content and stuff like that, I wouldn't have come out as a feeder or a feedee. And every relationship I've had, I've come out at some point saying, yeah, hey, I'm into this, not pushing it on the person, just explaining this is something I'm into. Tried some stuffing stuff, didn't work with a partner. And then it's just pretty much, I think that may have also been another thing that solidified me being a feedee, but so that's pretty much how I came about into being a feedee, and the things that led me to becoming a feedee. I like girls getting fatter and I like myself getting fatter, so I think that's where the mutual gainer thing comes in, and it's more of, just a desire to enjoy food with a girl, pretty much. That's it. So that's everything that led me to my interests, my sexuality and feedism. So I hope that helps other people come to the realization of their own ideas of feedism and how they feel it fits with them. Thank you.
Okay, so this was the second episode of Hungry for More. Thank you so much for listening. I wanted to remind everyone how you can contact us, how you can find us. Pizza Wolf, you want to go first?
Yeah, you can find me on both Phoebe and FF Ambrosia, Pizza Wolf on there. That's the easiest way to find me. And how about you, TLC? You're all over the place.
I'm all over the place. Yeah, you can find me as Tenderloving Cares, also on Ambrosia, on Phoebe. I have my Tumblr, which is tenderlovingcares.tumblr.com. I also have the website, which is HORNGRYmagazine.com. You can listen to the podcast directly embedded on the website if you don't happen to like YouTube and SoundCloud and iTunes. And by the time you're listening to this very podcast, the day before will be the release date of Hungry 4. So I have some awesome stuff coming up in the 4th issue. One of those things including an interview with the guys behind Phoebe, the admins and moderators, and they've answered a bunch of questions about some of the controversial things, but also some of the good things. What it takes to have a website gather 75,000 people in only a year, but also the issues they've run into moderating the whole place. I've asked them about some of their banning, how they deal with sexual harassment. So if you're interested in any of those things, look into it. I know the magazine is mostly BHM, FFA related, but there's going to be some big stuff in that upcoming magazine that kind of relate to all of us if we're in the Feedism community. So make sure to check that out, and I hope it's going to be awesome. I hope you're going to like it. It's also going to be on my website, HORNGRYmagazine.com, so you can read it online or download it, anything. It's free. You don't even have to sign up. Just do that. But if you do want to support all the Hungry projects, don't forget that I have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/Hungry. where you can actually get some exclusive rewards and some insight into the process behind making Hungry, mostly the magazine. Yeah. Again, special thanks to Mike for making our awesome intro music. You can find more of his music on soundcloud.com/MikeAshley, or you can follow him on his Tumblr at gainingstraight.tumblr.com.
We also, of course, want to take the time to thank everyone who contributed their origin stories to us here at HORNGRY for more. We look forward to hearing from you guys. Give us your top threes. Like, share, and subscribe to this podcast along with our channel in general.
Or tell us your own origin story.
Yeah, give us whatever. I mean, we make it. It's by the community and for the community. So we are you. We want to hear if there's something you want us to cover in a future episode. Just let us know. Any ideas or feedback is always welcome.
So that's it for the second episode. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, everyone.
I'm hungry. I'm so hungry. Yeah, I'm hungry. I'm so hungry. Yeah, I'm hungry. I'm so